friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in the tri-state region and sometimes beyond. Today, we have taken a little deviation from the authors that we have been presenting, and we are going to talk to a couple of editors. They've been on here before, a number of years ago, when they first started their business, which is We Edit Books, but we've asked them to come back again to talk about their company and how it can assist people who want to write a book. And we thought, as a reader, the audience would probably be interested in how a book actually gets to that stage where they can pick it up and read it. So we want to welcome them today. Fran Allred is a graduate of Marshall University's Page Pitt School of Journalism. She worked as a reporter and editor at the Charleston Gazette for 5 years before coming to Huntington, where she was at the Herald-Dispatch, and she advanced there from being a reporter to the features editor, from there to the Metro editor, and finally the managing editor of the Herald-Dispatch during 30 years being there. I believe she was at that time the only female managing editor in the state. That's quite
And the first.
That's quite an accomplishment. And during that time, she also wrote a column for the Herald-Dispatch. For her distinguished career, she was named to the Marshall University Journalism Hall of Fame. Mickey Johnson is also a retired newspaper editor. He started his career at the Herald-Dispatch as an obituary clerk and went on to edit newspapers in Ohio, Georgia, Florida, and Indiana. He's also the co-author of 2 books on the history of Marshall University football, one called Rolling Thunder and The Marshall Story, College Football's Greatest Comeback. He's a Vietnam War veteran and earned his bachelor's degree at Marshall. Before they started We Edit Books, Fran and Mickey had covered cops, courts, government, written editorials, columns, and features for the newspapers. So they really learned to write stories about a wide variety of issues and topics, and to also appreciate their own professional editors. So now they're putting that to good use in what I would call their retirement from their day jobs and working with We Edit Books. And I think we should talk about that, how you decided some 3 or so years ago that this is a company that needed to come into existence.
We did, and I guess from my perspective, it resulted from boredom. I talked to Fran about the notion, and we decided that we'd like to do it. 1, because we enjoy reading, and 2, because we enjoy being around talented, creative people. And we've enjoyed it to this point. We've worked with some very talented people.
When you all were writing stories, what was the one thing, or when you were editing, what was the one thing you noticed that stories needed when you got your hands on them? Even though you had talented reporters and so forth, what did they need the most when you got your hands on them?
There's a thing that for a while they referred to as a nut graph in stories. And that means you have to have a story a paragraph near the top of the story that explains why this is important, why the reader would want to read. Reinforce the idea of, stay with us, reader, we're going to go into this. And I think that's important in book editing too, magazine editing. And then I guess the other thing was in writing for newspapers, you have to make every word count. So you have to hook a reader in the very first sentence, and you have to hang on to them till the end of the ride. And if you wander off the path, some editor needs to get you back on track. Because you're asking a lot of readers, both in newspapers and in books. If they aren't held by what you're writing, then you really might as well just throw it out the window.
Yeah, there is a book out there on writing called The First 7 Pages. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. Absolutely. It's not a graph, but the first 7 pages have to hook you, or you're going to put that book down and move on to something else. I know a lot of people feel compelled to finish reading a book to the end, but after you've done it for a number of years and you've only got a certain amount of time to read a certain number of books, right, you're going to quit when it just doesn't grab your attention.
One of the first things I noticed when I became an editor was that there are very good reporters and very good writers, but rarely do those talents mesh or come together? And one of the things that I believe is important about editing is trying to make sure that they're both working together, getting the facts together as well as being able to tell a story in a way that's compelling and interesting. So that became apparent to me early on, I think.
So, as you've been doing this now for 3 years, what kind of projects have you seen? Have there been the kinds you expected? Have they mostly been fiction, nonfiction? Tell us a little bit about what you've seen in 3 years.
A lot, but
I sort of thought we wouldn't find customers. I didn't think there were enough people out there to make it worth our while. I wasn't as confident as Mickey was.
Or else you weren't as bored.
Well, maybe. But we've done all kinds of things. We've done fiction. We've done several nonfiction. We did some things that weren't really books, but were written more as handbooks and manuals,
More technical.
more technical things.
Sure.
Gosh, some people want us to edit their query letters. Some people want us to edit the
Oh.
first 5 chapters so they can submit them. Doesn't matter to us.
Huh.
And we're working with one author who I think will eventually write a book about the effect of substance abuse disorder on her family. And we've read a lot of it already, but she's not through writing it. And she won't. But
So
she
that
won't-
would be memoir,
Yes.
in a sense. Huh, that's interesting. When you get a person who's interested and they have written maybe several books, why do they still need an editor? You know, it's kind of like, well, I can write, obviously I'm good at it, and I've sold a number of books. Why can't I just edit this myself? What do you tell them?
You can.
But,
you run a big risk, but everybody needs an editor. When Fran and I are sending correspondence to people, we edit one another's emails or letters, whatever the case may be, to make sure that that we're doing it the right way and that we're not making errors. But everyone needs an editor, and it's amazing how many people believe they don't. It's almost literary malpractice to try to do it any other way.
so it's clear that the way you all work from your website, the information that's on there, is that it's a collaboration. It's not like the teacher grading
No.
your term paper.
Right.
Tell us about that.
When we worked in newsrooms, we usually had the reporter in the same room with us, or we could call that reporter if we had a question. And quite often, the reporter would come and sit or stand beside us while we went through it, especially if it was something complex. And we would, on the spot, on deadline, we would go through it, and here's why, tell me the answer to this question. We like that. We think that works. The reporters like it because they get to see why you're changing their stories. So what we try to do is develop a relationship with people and stay in contact with them. And we tell them this all the time. The book belongs to the author. And when we send back a manuscript and it's got margin notes, Mickey will put in there, it's your call. So you don't have to do what we suggest.
We, in newsrooms, most always, we tried to have 2 editors read a story before it went to a copy desk to get a headline and another edit. One of the things that we thought would be helpful to authors is the fact that we both read the story. It's not as if we get a book and Fran says, well, I want to read this one, you read the next one. We both read them.
Multiple times.
Yes, and we work on a platform that allows us to work simultaneously on a manuscript. So that's helpful. I can see what Fran's doing, and she can see what I'm doing, and she'll be at home and I'll be at my house.
Do you all disagree sometimes?
No.
Not
No.
often,
That's
if
amazing.
ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That comes from 65 years combined experience, I guess.
Well, and the benefit of having worked together for,
We
That's
think,
true.
pretty much
For a
think
long
alike
time,
on those
yeah.
topics.
Uh-huh,
yeah.
yeah,
Every now and then, one of us will find something the other one didn't, or have an idea the other one didn't, but we
Right.
don't usually disagree.
that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say I have a book, and I decide that it needs you all. What's the process? I mean, if I find, I got your card, or I saw you on this show, for instance, and I'm writing a book, and now what's the process?
Well, the first thing is we'd want to have a conversation with you, and we want to talk to you about the book content, who you're trying to reach, what manner in which you're trying to reach a reader, and then we'd like to see a couple of chapters, the first couple of chapters. And from there, then we'd go back and have another conversation with you and decide whether or not we want to take on the project or whether you're comfortable with us. Because we believe that this whole process ought to be a partnership and a relationship that permits you to be as successful with your work as we want you to be with it. Because that's the bottom line for us is your success as an author.
Have you rejected projects in the past 3 years?
A couple
Yeah.
that were kind of queries. We don't do poetry. I'm sorry, I like poetry, but I'm just not competent to edit poetry, I
Yes,
don't think.
okay.
And there's some topics that we don't want to edit. Politics, for one. So, on those grounds, we've turned some people away.
I see. All right, so explain to our audience exactly what it means to edit a manuscript. I mean, that's a pretty broad term, and I know there are a variety of ways in which a book can be edited. Let's start with that premise, that nobody knows what editing means and what something has gone through to get it into the printed form that they're sitting there reading.
Okay, I'll start and you jump in. Obviously, we're going to do grammar, we're going to do punctuation, we're going to do spelling, we're going to do word choices, we're going to do verbs agreeing with their subjects, all the basic stuff you learned in English but forgot. More important in a way than that is what's actually in the book, the content, the story. Is the line of the plot clear? Is it running all over the place? Is it logical? Are there what we call plot holes or inconsistencies that make a reader go, ooh, 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 ooh. So if you are going to tell me that you went to see the Bastille, I'm going to look that up and I'm going to tell you, no, you didn't, because they tore it down.
I see.
So that kind of thing. We do that. Mickey's especially good at historical research. He's the war expert, histories of wars, and we run into those quite often. We try to help people with pacing.
What is that? Can you explain that? I understand it, but can you explain that for
Well,
me?
when you start reading a book, visually, I don't think the story goes like this. I think the story goes like this and
Yes.
this and this and then this. And there are devices that help you to adjust the content of the story so in such a way that it gives the reader a chance to read up to this peak of tension and then kind of take a breath when you
Yeah.
go back down to a normal level, and then here again there's another one. So we try to
Just
help
can't
with,
read at that
you can't
level
just
all the
live
time.
it. You
Yeah.
can't live at a monotone. You just can't do it. What else do we do?
We make sure characters are well developed. That's very important to the success of a good novel. We offer 3 levels of editing. Basic proofreading, then copy editing.
Proofreading's going to catch bad spelling.
Exactly.
punctuation.
Punctuation, grammar, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Proofreading is a little more thorough. And then the third level, and the most comprehensive, is content editing. And that's the things that Fran mentioned.
But we
plot.
do fact check. I mean, we do
Yeah.
that automatically
Yeah.
because that's what we're trained to do.
Sure.
And it's a whole lot easier now than it was when we
Yeah.
were
Oh,
working.
my word, yes.
Yeah, because everybody's got a way to research, and we used to have to go to a library for that.
Anachronisms stop or ears cold. We like to make sure that we protect an author from himself or herself when those kinds of things pop up, and that helps with our expertise in research and the fact
there's
that
a-
we like to do that. So
Right. And then there's a different price level for each of those types of
yes, there is.
publishing, I mean, of editing.
Right.
Okay. So from low to high, it's a couple dollars a page to,
8.
Basic,
To
yeah,
eight.
The full ride is 8.
$8 a page.
And I mean, we don't just, each of us doesn't just read the manuscript once. We go through it multiple times.
do you sign a contract with your authors?
We do not.
Just,
We insist that authors keep their original in their computer system. So if we do something to your manuscript, you don't have to use it.
yeah. All right, so look, you were talking about somebody who's now writing a book. Assuming that she wants to continue with you, will you do it like a chapter or so at a time until she's finished? Or will you wait till she's through?
We'll wait till she's through. We don't want to see your first draft. We think first drafts are really important enough that they deserve a second look, and that the author should do that. No first draft is ready for publication, in my opinion. So send us your best effort, and do everything you would want to do to make it as perfect as you can make it.
And then when you get to the point where you think, I can't do anything more,
Right.
then it's your
Go ahead and
turn.
have some people read it. Have your cousin who's an English major read it. Do all that. That's fine. And in fact, I think it helps everybody.
Sure. Yeah, the more eyes on something, the better, it seems to me. Anything is like that. When I write, I give it to my husband sometimes, and he catches typos because he's a very slow reader. That I don't catch because I'm looking at the content. So I understand how it requires two different types of readers, for
It does.
instance. Yeah,
And you can't concentrate on all of it on one read.
right,
You just can't I can't keep my mind on
yeah.
all of it.
Do you rely on certain manuals of style when you're working with this? Or I know you all probably work with AP style,
We
which
do.
is a little different than the Chicago manual of style.
We use it too.
You
We
use
use
both of them?
both,
Okay.
yes, as well as elements of style.
Yeah, yeah. That one,
The
that one's
Strunk and White
timeless.
book, yeah, we're all familiar with.
That's
it.
timeless, right.
Right.
All right, let's assume a book does need a lot of work. How do you accomplish that without changing the author's style? I mean, for instance, I was thinking about this the other day. E. Cummings didn't use punctuation, okay? And I've been reading The Man in the High Castle by Philip Dick, and he sometimes skips verbs, which would drive me crazy. And then there's like Michener just detailed absolutely everything under the sun, from, a grain of sand to the whole of Alaska. How do you manage that and still stay within the style that the person wants it to stay in? I mean, would you have argued with E. Cummings about his punctuation?
I wouldn't argue with Michener about his detail. I mean, the man was a researcher who threw away more than he kept, so we kind of go with the flow. I mean, we kind of have to put ourselves in the place of the author and say, okay, this is what he wants to say, or this is the way she wants this to be. How can we make that work?
If we run into a manuscript, though, that's hopelessly
Flawed, shall we say?
yes, that's a very, yeah. We'll be frank and candid with the we'll have a conversation with them and suggest that perhaps they want to go back and do some extensive rewriting. We've done that with.
We've done that.
With a few people.
And some, one came back a year later, and we started over and did the whole thing again, and made a good many more recommendations on things that needed to be done. and things of a more basic nature than just editing.
And we found in virtually every case that honesty and our willingness to sit down and explain that is appreciated by the author.
Sure, right.
So, again, our goal is to make the best work possible for that author, and you can't do that unless you're frank and candid with them.
Right, exactly. I had a situation once where the editor from the publishing house had a love affair with the word "that," and I do not. And he put it in, and I asked the publisher, "Do I have to stick with this?" And he said, "No, tell him reject it, take it out." So I can see that when you have an editor or editors that are willing to work with you, you're going to come out with the book that both people are happy with, that the editor believes is the best that the author can do, and that the author's got the best advice that they can have. I think that's good. Sometimes, sometimes authors do feel like, and I think I did in this case in particular, that the editor is the English teacher with the red pen,
There could be editors like that out there.
Yeah. When you were a writer, when you were a publisher, when you worked at the newspaper, how'd you feel when people edited your work? Did you feel happy about it?
I was usually grateful about
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, they usually save me from myself.
Right, because in virtually every case, that editor's going to make your work better. And I'm like Fran, I was grateful for the help I got from the editors I worked with.
That's good. That's
And
good.
I'm to this day, it's made a difference in how I approach, how I look at someone else's work, because I've benefited from that.
That's good. Let's talk a little bit about the news business. 3 years ago, when you came on Chapters with Elliot, he asked you if you thought newspapers would eventually disappear. And you said you thought there would always be journalists, but the news would be presented perhaps in a different way. It was unclear at that time. Well, 3 years later, we have newspapers who are no longer in business. We have some newspapers, both local and in many other cities that I know of, who have dropped at least one day of print publication. What's your take on where we'll be in 5 years, now, 3 years later?
I think people will still be wanting to know the news. I think there will be other outlets for news that we don't have now. I think there's a crop right now. I think those will be put aside by whatever comes next, probably electronic. But I still think people want to know the news, and there are people out there who want to write it.
What do you say to people who don't like to read it electronically? What are they going to do? They're going to have to get used to it?
I think so,
Yeah.
because there'll be no alternative. The frequency of publishing that you cited, Carter, dropping days of publication, that sort of thing, that's going to continue. When you're trying to make money, you're going to do cuts in how you produce a product, and in this case, it's a newspaper. And newsprint's an expensive commodity when it comes to publishing.
Sure.
As well as people. So you're seeing newsrooms shrink, frequency of publication shrink, and that's going to continue. I don't think there's any way around that. My fear is that people want their preconceived notions validated, and we're resorting now to sources of news that reinforce that, for good or bad. And in my opinion, it's mostly bad, because people won't go to other sources to check to see, was that truthful what I just read, or should I look somewhere else for another source? And I really think that we're going to lose a lot, and I think democracy is going to lose a lot if that trend continues. Unfortunately, I don't see it abating or changing.
How does somebody ferret out what I would call fake news? How do you know?
Read more sources. Read sources across the spectrum. Study it. Learn what happens. Pay attention. Get involved with knowing what's going on. I think the nation depends on that.
It's simply intellectual curiosity.
It is.
And too few people have that these days, I
Yeah.
think.
I worry too that in some cases they're shrinking civic classes in the education system, and that goes to what you're saying, is that if you don't know history and you don't know how it works, then you're still going to stick in that same cocoon that you're used to, and
Right,
it reinforces you.
We retreat
Yeah.
to tribes that
Right,
reinforce
exactly.
what we believe, and too often there are other ways of looking at problems,
Right.
and we need to explore all of them, not just
And
the
I think
ones that-
writing can do that as well. If people would read a variety of the types of books that are out there, there's a multitude of opinions in books, and a way to look at the world and the world view, change your world view perhaps, instead of reinforcing the one you grew up with, which is
Right.
not always broad.
It's harder to read something you don't agree with,
Yeah,
but it certainly can inform you in other ways that
right.
you might not get anyplace
Right.
else.
I've been really impressed with your all's website too. And I'm particularly impressed with the way you have used it to promote writing-related events, and you've used social media to a good end to do that. Why do you all think that's so important?
Well, because reading's important, and the work that authors do is important, and the more people we can expose to that, the better off authors are, the better off we all are for knowing where events like this happen and who's doing what with books, and again, it all circles back to the fact that we want to see authors succeed.
And your blog reinforces that too. I think that's a very helpful addition to your website. So tell us what the website is. It's www.weeditbooks.com.
Right.
Exactly.
It looks like we did when you
We,
just,
yeah. You want
Right.
to tell her about the check we?
no.
You got a check
want-
signed up to Weed It with two
Yeah.
E's instead of one.
Yeah, and it had a joint rolled up. The guy had drawn a picture. Yeah, it was amusing.
That's great,
Yeah.
that's great. All right, so that's the fastest way for them to get, for a potential author or an author to get in touch with you all, is to do it through the website.
Through the website, there's a
Absolutely, yeah.
contact us button, and you just
Right.
send us a note and tell us you want to talk, and we'll get together and talk to you on the phone and go
And
from there.
and we enjoy doing the blog too.
You write that, or both of you?
We do it in conjunction with one another. Yeah,
That's
so,
great.
yeah. And we're writing a column for the West Virginia Writers newsletter. It's
That's good.
quarterly, and we enjoy doing that too. So
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being with us. I think it's been informative to me certainly, and I hope to our viewers, because they read books, but you never know whether or not they understand how it got to be a book.
well,
So-
thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you, it was wonderful. We also want to thank the Inner Geek for providing their on-site support, and remind you that the authors that we have highlighted here on chapters often have their books for sale at the Inner Geek, and we hope you'll come down here, not just for their books, but for all the books you want to read. And that'll be it for today, and we expect you to come back again and see us again on Chapters on Armstrong Television. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Connect with Chapters via email. Write to lp4@zoom.email. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, and follow. All chapter episodes are available on YouTube. Visit Armstrong's YouTube channel. Follow Armstrong. And look for a playlist of all the chapter's programs.